Hello there, my name is Paul the Star Wars Guy, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And I just got done watching Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. That is what this video is about. And this time I watched it in a watch party, and I want to send a special shout out and thank you to Miss Deborah Young and to Geeky Bixie for being there to watch the movie with me, especially on such short notice. So as always with these reviews, I'll be giving two different perspectives, what I thought of it the first time I had seen it, and what I think of it now. So I first saw Revenge of the Sith when I was in 5th grade. I didn't see it until it came out on DVD, and I remember that Mom and Dad had me close my eyes when the scene came that Anakin basically got burned alive because of the lava. And I really didn't see that scene all the way through until I was an adult on my own in the military. But even in spite of that, I remember, and I still think of this movie today, that this is the best of the 3 prequel movies, but also the saddest of the whole series. And let's get into why that is. And we're going to start, fittingly enough, with talking about Anakin. First off, talking about acting, I think that Hayden Christensen did an even better job in this movie than he did in Attack of the Clones. This version of Anakin is not as awkward as he was in Episode 2. He's much more confident with himself, with his abilities, and yet he still has that pull to the dark side that he indulges more and more throughout the movie, ultimately to where he falls completely to the dark side and becomes Darth Vader. Now, something that I brought up in my series of the original trilogy that I really have not talked about with the prequels up to now is when I was talking about Luke, I framed his story along this outline of something that I had called the hero's journey, which, to reiterate really quick, is a story where there's this hero that starts in a very humble place but is called upon this grand adventure to defeat ultimately this big evil force, and he may doubt his calling, and he may be tried and tested and tempted along the way, but ultimately he overcomes this great evil and brings peace. And Luke had that story down to a T. Well, with Anakin, it's the opposite of that, where yes, Anakin, like Luke, going back to Episode 1, started in this very humble place as a slave, and is called to become a Jedi, but he actually gives in to his temptations. He wants to go save his mother, but can't because he's too late, and then he starts giving into his emotions, giving into his anger, taking it out on the Sand People. Continuing into Episode 3, he gives into his anger at Count Dooku, as Palpatine said, for cutting off his hand, and he beheads Count Dooku. And he just keeps feeding that darkness in him more and more until he becomes the very monster he was supposed to destroy. So what we have with Anakin is basically the hero's journey failing. Anakin starts with the intention of becoming this great hero, but by the end of it, he has become the very thing, as Obi-Wan said, that he swore to destroy. And I think Hayden Christensen played that whole downfall of Anakin absolutely perfectly. And then talking about the other characters, Obi-Wan Kenobi. As I've said before, Obi-Wan is my favorite Star Wars character of all time, and between this movie and the Clone Wars is the reason why. Because in this movie, more so than in Episode 2, in Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan, by now, has pretty much become the textbook Jedi Master, at least Jedi Master of the prequels era. And Ewan McGregor, this is hands down his best performance as Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I really liked the way that he had that confrontation with Grievous, that he was able to handle that he was able to handle himself against Anakin Skywalker, arguably one of the best lightsaber duelists in the entire galaxy. not necessarily by fighting harder, but by fighting smarter, fighting more defensively, letting his opponents make mistakes that he ultimately capitalizes on, be it with Grievous cutting his different hands off because he has 4 of them, or Anakin, of course, as we know from the meme, getting to the high ground first and letting Anakin try to jump over him, but ultimately failing. And then with Yoda, I neglected to mention this in my last video in episode 2, but it was also really cool seeing Yoda actually pick up a lightsaber and fight. Sure, he did it in episode 2 first, but we get to see even more of it in episode 3, especially when he takes on the Emperor, not just in a battle of blades, but a battle of the Force too. And then Padme kind of took a more of a backseat role in this movie, but then again, she really could not do much because she was pregnant in this movie with Luke and Leia, and you're not going to see her doing the same things that she was doing in episode 1 and 2, picking up a blaster and going out to the front lines to fight the droids, because she'd be endangering her unborn children. So she tended to stay more of the normal senator/housewife in this movie, and I think she did okay with that, even if I prefer the episode 1 and especially episode 2 version of her over this. And then I would also say that this is Samuel L. Jackson's best performance as Mace Windu. And just a quick funny note that my dad actually shared with me yesterday when I was watching episode 2, something I had never realized. If you look at Sam Jackson's complete career, his role in Star Wars as Mace Windu is the only role he ever has that he does not curse. Think about that for a second. But getting back on topic, Sam Jackson as Mace Windu perfectly represents what the Jedi had become by especially the end of the Clone Wars, so concerned with their own ideals, so concerned with winning a war that they ultimately forgot to follow the will of the Force, as Qui-Gon Jinn did in episode 1, and they became arrogant in their own abilities, especially seen when Windu has Palpatine backed into a corner and he thinks that he alone can end he alone can end the threat of the Sith once and for all, and being so blinded by his own arrogance that he doesn't even begin to sense that Anakin is going to turn on him and allow Palpatine to finish him off. And then, of course, Palpatine himself, Ian McDiarmid, is great as always, and we finally see him out himself as the Sith Lord, and we finally see his transformation from a normal-looking elderly gentleman to someone completely disfigured by the dark side of the Force. And I heard an interesting theory about this, the scene where Palpatine is shocking Mace Windu, but Mace Windu is blocking all of the lightning back onto him. I forget where I heard this. This might have been Star Wars theory, but I'm not 100% sure. But I heard a theory somewhere that it wasn't really the lightning that was getting reflected back onto Palpatine that caused his face to get messed up like that. The theory that I heard states that Palpatine's face was already messed up like that because of so long being exposed to the dark side, yet he was using the Force to basically create an illusion of a perfectly normal face for an elderly man, and that when Mace Windu reflected the lightning back onto Palpatine, the lightning sort of made that mask disappear, exposing Palpatine for who he really was. And sure, there's no confirmation of that in the movie, but it seems entirely plausible to me. But it was really nice to see Ian McDiarmid play both the very subtle, conniving version of Palpatine, as well as the full-blown, power-hungry Emperor that we see him in the original trilogy in Empire and Return of the Jedi. And then finally, we talk about Order 66. Now, I had just watched last night and again today Bad Batch before I saw this movie. And by the way, Bad Batch episodes 1 and 2, those are going to be my next two videos. But seeing Order 66 happen in Bad Batch, and then later on tonight seeing Order 66 happen in this movie, in Revenge of the Sith, it just brought so much weight to what was going on and how different the galaxy was going to be after this one event. And this, in Order 66, is like one of the two biggest, well, three biggest reasons why I say that this is the saddest of the Star Wars movies. Because all of the Jedi die at the hands of the same people, the same soldiers that they fought and bled alongside with for, I think it was 5 years between episodes 2 and 3. So for those 5 years, the Jedi had been fighting alongside these troops, and as we see in the Clone Wars series, had grown, in some cases, quite close with their men, as Obi-Wan had with Cody. And then all of a sudden, these same men that the Jedi fought alongside are now trying to kill them like they don't even know them anymore. Heck, that's kind of what we see in the series finale of the Clone Wars and in the Bad Batch. It's like the clones aren't even really human anymore, they're drones. And I'll talk more about that in the Bad Batch reviews itself. But getting back onto Revenge of the Sith, Order 66, like I said, is one of three reasons why I say that this is the saddest Star Wars movie. The second reason is because of Padmé's death. Now, another theory that I heard, again, I don't know if this is true, but it seems plausible to me, is that Palpatine basically killed Padmé by somehow sapping the life force out of her through the dark side and then putting it into Vader so that he could survive his injuries. Again, I don't know if that's what he actually did, but spoiler alert, given that we see him sap life energy out of Kylo Ren and Rey in The Rise of Skywalker, I think it's very well possible that he could do that. He says himself, the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. So I don't see why he couldn't have taken the life force from Padmé and given it to Vader so that he'd survive his injuries in the suit. And then, of course, reason number 3 why this movie is the saddest of the Star Wars movies is, of course, Anakin's turn to the dark side. How he went into it with, at least in his mind, the best intentions of wanting to save Padmé from dying, like he wanted to with his mother. And yet, by the time he had fully embraced the dark side, he lost everything. He lost his adopted family with the Jedi, he lost his friendship with Obi-Wan, and even lost his wife, because his anger at potentially, at least in his mind, being betrayed, just led him to choke his wife, Padmé, when ordinarily he would never have done that. So for those 3 reasons right there, and ultimately seeing Anakin, what became of him physically, losing the other 3 of his remaining limbs in that fight, and getting burned alive by the lava, it was just such a tragic thing to happen to what started as this innocent little boy on Tatooine. So, changing the subject now, off the story and the characters, let's talk a little bit about the action. So, this is the Star Wars movie that has the most amount of lightsaber fights to them. And I like every single one of them, though if I was to make one complaint about Revenge of the Sith in general, it's that there are some lightsaber fights, and this really isn't that much of a complaint if you think about it, but there are a couple of those lightsaber fights that I would have liked to see more of. And that is Yoda versus Palpatine, Windu versus Palpatine, and Obi-Wan versus Grievous. And when I say see more of them, I mean that I want to see more of actual lightsaber blades actually coming in contact with each other. Like, yeah, it was cool to see Palpatine and Yoda duke it out with the Force throwing around those Senate floating cars, whatever those things are called, and Palpatine shooting lightning at Yoda for him to catch in his hands like he did against Dooku. But me personally, being such a big fan of the lightsaber in general, I would have liked to have seen them actually swinging around their lightsabers. Though at the same time, it's kind of confirmed that Palpatine really was not that big a fan of lightsabers to begin with, thinking that they were beneath him, and he would have much rather used the Force because that's where his true strength was. So it kind of makes sense for his character. And then I personally would have liked to see the Obi-Wan versus Grievous fight end with Obi-Wan impaling Grievous through the chest with his lightsaber instead of shooting him, because at least to me that kind of goes against what Obi-Wan would later say in Episode 4, where he claimed that a lightsaber was an elegant weapon, not as clumsy or random as a blaster. And then as far as Mace Windu versus Palpatine, I would have liked to have just seen more of that, period. Though, I suppose there is a bit of a trade-off there, because what we lacked in those fights, as far as how much of it we saw, we got a lot of that made up for us with Obi-Wan versus Anakin. This many people consider to be the absolute best of the lightsaber fights in the entire series. And if we're looking at it just through the lens of action, I can certainly agree with them. Even though me personally, I only consider this my second favorite lightsaber fight, with Luke versus Vader from Return of the Jedi being my favorite, because as I mentioned in my Return of the Jedi video, I also really like the psychology of the lightsaber fight, where it's basically 2 against 1, with Luke trying to not only defend physical attacks against Vader, but also psychological attacks from both Vader and Palpatine, trying to goad him into using the dark side. Though I will say, even though Obi-Wan versus Anakin only makes second place for me as far as my favorite lightsaber fights, and I'll probably do a lightsaber fight ranking video at some point, but even though Obi-Wan versus Anakin is only my second favorite lightsaber fight, there is some cool battle psychology here that I really like. And part of the reason why this was such a long fight is because both Obi-Wan and Anakin know each other and know each other's fighting style so well that pretty much anything, say, Obi-Wan threw at Anakin, Anakin could counter it, and vice versa. And the other thing is, Obi-Wan was, as I mentioned before, was basically fighting smarter, not harder, because he knew that if he just went in a full-on assault on Anakin, Anakin would likely counterattack him and beat him. So Obi-Wan stayed on his back foot pretty much the whole fight until he tired Anakin out, and Anakin made a fatal error in judgment, which Obi-Wan capitalized on. So, even though, Obi-Wan versus Anakin is only my second favorite lightsaber fight out of the whole series, there is a lot that I love about this movie. And there's really not much else that I can say that I haven't said already as far as the movie-making process goes. The CGI in this, I don't mind, because again, I've grown up with it, though I can certainly see where other people would say that the CGI was overused. And again, John Williams did absolutely amazing work with this, especially with the track Battle of the Heroes. I think it's on par with Duel of the Fates easily. So that's pretty much my thoughts on Revenge of the Sith. Thank you guys for watching this. My next two videos are going to be reviews of the first episode of The Bad Batch, and since we're getting a new one, I believe early Friday morning, I think, I'm going to do a review on that one. And then Sunday at about 5 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to do another live stream where I will be talking with you guys about the prequels as a whole. And I want to present a question in this live stream that we're going to debate. There's no right or wrong answer to this question because everyone's going to have their own different point of view on it. But the topic that I want to focus on with this upcoming live stream is, do the prequels as a whole deserve the hate that they've gotten? So stay tuned for that. Click like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of that, and I will see you guys later. Thank you very much.